What's going on, y'all, and welcome back to another Etheria restart video. Today I want to talk about shells, shell tier list, where all the current good mythic shells are at, where they're used, which ones you should be focusing on right now, and then, you know, which ones are more for like PvP focused stuff. But just a quick update, guys. We are doing really well here. We just hit level 90, and just the PSA for y'all. It might be a little too late as of watching this, but make sure at least this next reset you guys do get your Ember Treks, Ethernet rallies. These are such good resources for getting resources, I should say, sources for resources. And if you need any help, we did clear up the entire Ember Trek hard mode, and I think this new reset is going to be poison. The mechanic is going to be poison instead of stun, so that might actually be a little bit easier. The stun was kind of annoying, especially I know a lot of people complained about 42 and the stun RNG there. So yeah, just anyways, make sure you guys are checking those out, and then I'm going to wrap up this anti-sync echoes 36 out of 42. Hopefully we can get that done as well. But today, let's just go ahead and bring this up real quick. I want to open up the archive, have this shell one ready because I'm going to refer back to that. But let's go ahead and jump straight over the tier list. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's jump right into it. All right, guys, I had to upload all the shell images here for us for your easy convenience. And some of these are not just PvP. For example, I'll get to the count later, but like this guy is definitely good for real mocha in a Doki Doki one-shot scenario. But typically, like, I'm going to talk about each one, where you want to farm them, when maybe you should shift around, and what you should be looking out for. And there's other things too, guys. Like, I could definitely see like Jackal Guard and White Fang up here. It's not too important. But I just did want a distinction between the power levels, and I'll explain why. Okay, so once again, don't take these tier lists too seriously. If you guys are, you know, if you think White Fang should be up here, I could definitely see that, but you'll understand kind of where I place things as we go through each individual one. But let's start from the very top, guys, and I got Artisan, and I think this guy is the clear cut #1 shell in the game. Now, I could see in the future here, as our gear progresses, let's say just PvE right now. In PvE, I could see this kind of maybe moving aside until more difficult content is released. But right now, while, you know, the bosses and enemies hit so hard, I think the defense shells, or sorry, the defensive barriers, especially when you can stack a little defense on top of that too. Think of units like Valerian, think of units like Lily. This thing gets very, very obscene. And I'm not even talking about the other cheese you can do by using shell cooldown units, such as, I believe it's Fire Chiaki, Tsukiyomi, just to name a few. And there's one more here. I know Lily. There's a few characters that can reset the shell cooldowns. And if you have a lot of artisans, you start to increase your survivability so much that you're practically invincible. Now, I don't think that method is required, and I wouldn't invest too many shells into that, as they are adjusting Inferno difficulties. But just to say, like, this guy's strong PvE, PvP. The barriers are a lifesaver. They're almost like a pseudo heal, sometimes even better, depending on the situation. And yeah, I think this shell is just a monster everywhere right now, clearly deserved in the #1 spot. Definitely get at least one, if not two. And then some of y'all could spam 4 with that shell cooldown technique that I'm talking about, but I think it's not as mandatory anymore. All right, moving right along though. And by the way, this is farmed in the Doki Doki, and keep that in mind, guys. Doki Doki in the Inferno, it's going to be one of your first Inferno shell areas you farm, and it is so stacked, and that's why I rate a lot of these two in particular up here very, very highly, because, you know, actually, let's just say the trio with a little bit of splash of like Alicorn. It's a very strong beginner shell. Not only is it the easiest and it's just natural to progress in there, but like you get some very powerful shells. But let's keep going on, guys. We have the Codex of Magic, and this one drops from Rengokutsu. And he is, unlike Nikonana, the easiest. He's the hardest Inferno shell farm to do. Like myself, currently, I'm only at like a 70% success rate, and that's honestly really, really good compared to a lot of other runs. Because if you're missing some units, there's a lot of RNG, and he's the hardest shell farm in the game. But this, even when you don't have an Inferno shell, even if you're farming the Hell mode version, this thing is obscenely powerful as well. I think maybe Revelation we'll put up here actually. But let's go ahead and just finish talking about Codex real quick. Codex is just an extremely powerful PvE and PvP shell, deservedly in this S rank spot. All 4 of these, that's the reason they're up here, is because they're good in a multitude of areas, a multitude of modes, and they can be used by multiple different types of characters, right? This is not just defensive scaling bruisers. This is not just support units, but even like Lily, who wants to, you know, can stack a little defense, makes use of this. Revelation, we'll get to that. But like Codex, I'm talking your control units, your support units, PvP. This thing is just really, really powerful. In a turn-based game, being able to cast your most powerful abilities twice is super strong. Think of things like Kazuyo, think of things like Kloss, think of units like Obol with a powerful stun, casting 2 of those in a row, even things like Chalky, Dark Catchy, excuse me, not Chalky, Dark Catchy, to cast his very powerful S3 twice. Turn-based games, having that kind of ability to up the tempo big time is very, very valuable. So once again, PvE, PvP, this is super good. Try to farm it. Hell Rengo is much, much easier than Inferno. So I would actually pick up 1 to 2 copies of this whenever you can. Everybody's going to want at least 1. Now, I think we do put this guy in the number 2 spot because this thing is broken. This is called the Revelation, and this is farmed in Shadowflame Hoyan, which is actually not too much harder than Nikonan Inferno. I do have it clear for every one of those guys, but it is like I do use Dots, I do use Lily, but there are a lot of other resources I've seen with like more free-to-play centric teams, or just stop by my live streams as always. I know most of the comps that you can fit in and out depending on what you have in your roster. But this is just super strong, guys. Let's start with PvE. It's on most Unix except for Deeting, I would say. This is a premier DPS shell. You want to aim for this even past White Fang. Shiada, let's say Rosa, even like Messiah, Yeli, they all want this shell. And the more multi-hits you can achieve, as long as you have crit and a healthy amount of attack, this thing is adding so much value. And that's just PvE, guys. In PvP, I think this thing is so overtuned. We can slap this on any opener, any type of support unit that multi-hits, Kazuyo, RC, Freya, and we are just pumping out unethical amounts of damage. And it is so abusable and easy to farm that I expect this to get nerfed whenever they do come around with their, their end of RTA, end of arena season balance patch. Now, I don't think they'll nerf it for PvE. I think PvE is just fine, but I think in PvP it does need to be looked at. But for those reasons, it's so powerful, it's so good. And for the record, guys, on Revelation for your DPS units, you want to focus a little more attack when possible. So things like Onslaught, which is typically not as good on like White Fang, is actually pretty good on Revelation. If you want to know more, just stop by my live streams. I always talk about, people always ask about the Revelations and stuff like that. But since this is not a gearing guide, just use the best 12-8 setup you have. That's going to be typically like a Kenai Fury, Fury Edge, even something like an Onslaught Battle is what I'm rocking on my like Shiada. You can go a lot of different directions with this guy. So the first good Inferno shell, I would just rock that, and you can always swap it later. Now, last but not least in the S-Rank row, guys, we have the Gigabyte. And I think it's so close to Jackal. And I'll talk about why Jackal Guard is pretty dang good and might even surpass Gigabyte later on in the game. But for now, Gigabyte is so good. It only has one negative downside, and I'll talk about that at the end. But Gigabyte, let's talk about the pros. Anytime you have multiple enemies, let's think of areas like Doki Doki, areas like PvP where you're fighting 4+ enemies. This thing is so dang good. And then the fact that you can farm it in Nikonana very early means you can get an Inferno lineup of a 3-3-3. Think something like Swift Rush, Time Weave, plus like a Ether Plague, whatever the bonus is not bad at all. Very strong. It's just one of the most like useful, just turn meter pushing shells out there. You can almost never go wrong with this thing. I even still rock it on my healers until I get like a perfect supernova, because a very good rolled, I would say, Gigabyte is better than a mediocre supernova even on healers, just for the amount of turn meter, the fact that you're going to have like Swift Rush, Time Weave on it, and I think it's just a very solid shell. Now, the only downside, and let's go ahead and just jump into the game now, why I wanted to show y'all some things here. The only downside I would say to Gigabyte, besides, when there's fewer enemies, things like Jackal Guard gets a little better, is that the matrices that it can roll, unfortunately, don't cover some things that Jackal Guard. And we'll talk about Jackal Guard, very soon here. But, things like the Bulwark, which are going to be so important for PvP, and honestly, even some PvE scenarios, is going to be very important, and that only Jackal Guard can carry this, unlike Gigabyte. Sorry, Jackal Guard is not the only one that can carry this, but Gigabyte cannot, Jackal Guard can. And then Swift Smite is another one. Take note of this. The speed plus 15% is extremely important too later on in the game when you need to either speed contest in PvP, and honestly, even in PvE. I mentioned that I was in, floor 36 of Anti-Sync. There's some floors that you need to be very fast on, and having that plus 15% speed is honestly pretty crucial if your other speed subs aren't the best. But yeah, we'll talk about this more. I'm going to show you guys the different matrices. Keep that in mind. That is going to be one distinction, and that is what matrix are available for said shell. So even if the shell like Gigabyte is very good, there are things that Jackal Guard is better at. But the main thing too is if you play any speed up unit like Lily, if you play anything like Tsukiyomi that has speed up, then I would say Jackal Guard loses a little value there. And let's go and talk about this guy now. He's just a slight step below Gigabyte because one, PvP in any scenario where there's a lot of enemies, I think Gigabyte is better value. And then additionally, when you have the speed up buff, you know, the fact that Jackal Guard gives speed up too loses a little value. Now the upsides is that we have an attack, so he does have an attack shell, which is good in PvP. It's good for setting up Deting crosshair placements. You go ahead and just hit the unit that you want, and that'll lower it enough that Deting will put that crosshair on. Just to name one example. And then, like I said, the matrices, and of course the big turn meter push. I think the Matrix, though, that Jackal Guard that has the Bulwark and things like that, the Swift, excuse me, not Swift Rush, what is it called? Swift Smite, makes this a very strong shell. And I think as we move later in the game, especially if you don't want to run a speed up unit, I think Jackal Guard could outplace Gigabyte. But for now, I place him slightly lower as I don't think he's a priority at the current state of the game. But he is available with Revelation in Shadowflame Hoyan. So another very good one to farm. You can get both your DPS. It's similar to like the White Fang plus Gigabyte and Nico Nana. You have the Revelation and the Jackal Guard. Now, White Fang, and why I place him down here, guys. White Fang is still very good. The only reason I place him slightly lower than the others is because typically Revelation, except for Deting, is going to be your go-to DPS shell. Now, don't count out White Fang, guys. Not only is it good on Deting, you want to just get a Momentum Fury, a Keen Eye Fury, plus Fury Edge. That's going to be set for Deting. You know, I honestly could still use it on Yeli, could still use it on Messiah, but typically you want to go towards Revelation when you can. But one other thing, remember I talked about how you can have access to, right here, Swift Smite for the plus 15% speed. White Fang can actually get you the Swift Raid. So let's look at that real quick. For your openers, and I can show you guys here, White Fang actually has access to Swift Raid. And this is actually what I'm using right now until I get like a good Jackal Guard with Swift Smite. But you get a free Swift Raid, I believe it's for clearing Nico Nana, excuse me, Doki Doki. You clear one of the Infernos for the first time and the game will actually give you a Swift Raid piece. And then if you farm others, the plus 15% speed could be huge here. So a lot of times you'll actually see your opener, something like Lily. If you see a Lily, guys, with a Lily or Mia with a White Fang on in PvP, be wary. They're going to have plus 15% speed over you if you are not also using a Swift Raid or Swift Smite shell. So be very careful. You're probably going to get outsped until you get one of your own. Next up, guys, we have Halloween. And let's just talk about Halloween and Dark Cloud? Dark Moon? Hold on, let me look up the name real quick. Sorry, I apologize. I actually haven't used this guy, but I do actually, yeah, Dark Moon. I do want to use this guy. He has a very good set of matrices available. And then Halloween as well is a pretty good amount of matrices. The only problem is these two. So we've been talking about Shadowflame Hoyan. We've been talking about Nico Nana. These two are available. Actually, these three. Let's go and talk about all these three in a bunch here. These three are actually available in the Sharon. And Sharon, while it's not a super difficult shell farm like Codex of Magic from Inferno Rengo, these Inferno Sharon is, I think, I would rate it harder than both Nico Nana and even Shadowflame Hoyan because she's immune to dots. So we kind of have to build things like Catchy the Guard. And we kind of need some good damage, otherwise the dots can her dots can overtake you, and they do just too much damage. But in general, I would say these three are good, like midline shells to farm. They're not priority. I would say all the units here in S, and then these two here in A take priority over these three. But once you start getting to that end game where, you know, I would say like Viper and Kloss make very good uses of Dark Moon, and the fact that it has an attack damage ability, just like Jackal Guard, is good for things like setting up Deting. But if you didn't know what this does, it increases buff durations, just no crowd control effects, so nothing like Kazuyo. And it also won't increase dots. So very specific units like Kloss and Viper, things like that have strong debuffs that aren't in that category. Halloween is just, honestly, I think cooldown, guys, is king. Cooldown resets is very, very strong in this game. That's why Codex is so damn good, is because you just reset the entire ability. But if you just want something a little bit better in a long fight, and especially on units like Kazuyo that have no skill, that have a skill 2 passive, that means their skill 3 will always get hit by the cooldown reset here. And then you start stacking things like Time Weave. I think Halloween can be very strong, and I think some people haven't really gone into farming it either because Sharon is annoying, they don't want to farm it, or maybe they're just sleeping on this a little bit, but I think this is very good. Last but not least, I have the Supernova, and I think this is the easiest to use healing shell and just the most like reliable. You guys will have to tell me if you think Fortissimo is better, but from the people I've seen use it, and I haven't tested it myself too much yet, but I think just the ease of use of Supernova is going to be better, and especially when we're talking about modes like Aurora Inferno. Just having that flat amount of extra healing plus the heal over time ability, I think this is just better than Fortissimo. But I could be incorrect, and this might be better later on as we progress into the game. Like, for example, I was showing you guys the Ember Trek stun is now going to change to a poison that can be cleansed if you have like full health. Maybe the burst healing here is better, but I would say just go with Supernova if you need something good for like your Ling Low to clear out Aurora Inferno, where healing is very important to break past that cursed shield. All right, guys, moving into the B tier list, and I was hoping Golden Lion might be really good with Yelly. I've only seen like a few people really pop off with it, and in general, I just think Revelation, White Fang, and things like the Count are going to be much better, unfortunately. It just seems like unless you're building some kind of super utility, like setup debuffer for another DPS on your Yelly build, I don't see it being better than Revelation or the Count for PvP on Yelly. And then just, you know, besides Yelly, I don't really see anyone that can make great use of this. Maybe like a Fangus, some kind of hybrid Fangus build. If you guys have any ideas, let me know. But yeah, I don't think this shell is very good, at least right now. I could be wrong, but I would try to avoid farming just for this guy. He is alongside these three in the Sharon, I believe. And then Fortissimo, I think, is going to be, you know what, let's just double check so I know for sure. Fortissimo, does it say where they're available here? Is going to be available via, you know, we can't check that. We'll just go into the challenges. I think he's either Rango or it's probably Rango, right? It has to be by process of elimination. Yeah, Fortissimo is going to be over there in the Rango Kutsu. So yeah, I wouldn't advise farming for either of these two, and that's why I have them low in the lowest tier. Could be disrespecting a bit, but yeah, I would say they're not that great. Now the PvP tier list, guys, the Count. Once again, this can be used on the Real Mocha for your burst damage setups, but for other reasons, I think this is more of a PvP shell. And once again, let's jump back into the archive. It's mostly because of its access to It's access to very, very strong matrices for PvP units. So if you notice, it's one of the few, maybe the only, I think it's actually the only DPS or attacker shell that has access to Bulwark. I think Golden Lion might actually. No, even Golden Lion doesn't. But in PvP, I think having access to something like Bulwark, so you go like an Onslaught Bulwark build, and you kind of have like a Bruiser that can shrug off debuffs. And then, you know, of course, it has all the typical Swift Raid, Fury Edge. And then you get the Life Leech shell too. This is my idea for using something on like Yelly for a PvP setup. I think this could be very, very, very strong. Now, that being said, the fact that you need Inferno Rengo to get your good like 1286, 333 Matrix shells, I would say this is a later priority. And the fact that it's only good for Real Mocha, I would say for PvE primarily. You'd rather have something like Revelation for most of your other characters. And the fact that it's mostly a PvP shell, I would say farm this way later. Now, same thing with Law of Silence. I think that's what it's called. Gives you kind of like a stealth effect. Very, very cool mechanic. I don't think it's super popular in the current PvP scene. Now, that could change drastically anytime soon. But I actually think let's place... I didn't really order these too much yet. I actually would place it in one of the most unknown. No disrespect to it. I think it can be extremely good on units like maybe Messiah, maybe something like Yelly that are glass cannon nukes if you build them that way. But for now, I just think other shells are a little bit more priority. Alicorn is very good and honestly could be up in like the A tier. Depending on the content, I like to use it in Nico Nana to shrug off the stuns. But in general, I think it's more of a PvP shell, as a lot of times you'll bring a cleanser or something else for PvE. But having access to a shell that can just cleanse is very, very good. And the fact that it's also farmed alongside the White Fang and the Artisan, right? The Artisan, White Fang, Gigabyte. That quad set of shells is very, very good. So I think it's a great one. You're going to pick up a lot of them when you're Nico Nana. Definitely keep an eye out for good ones. You could find yourself using them in both PvE and PvP. Moving on quickly, though, we have Lighthouse. This is another Rengokutsu farm. And this guy, I think, is actually coming up in the PvP meta scene for units like that are bruisers, like Tiamat, for example. The fact that it has a huge heal and a turn meter push-up makes it very strong on bruisers that want that extra health. And additionally, it's one of the ways to fight the Revelation spam, the Revelation chi spam that I mentioned in PvP that's kind of taking over. So take note of the Lighthouse. It's going to be a later pickup. But the fact that it's PvP only, really, and the fact that it's Inferno Rengokutsu if you want a good one, yeah, this is going to be a way late game priority. Last but not least, guys, we have Amber, another PvP shell. I've seen some PvP players pull off really cool things with this. But in general, I don't like it as much. I think in other games, they have way better like revive type shells or artifacts. Holy Sacrifice in Epic 7. The fact that you have to freeze yourself and kind of stall out a turn makes it less interesting to me, but I do put some respect on it. I have seen it used very, very well in PvP. I would just rather, in my opinion, I like things like I would rather use like a lighthouse or like an artisan in exchange instead of like the revive sort of mechanic. But it can be good, and if you grab a good one, this is alongside the Revelation and the Jackal Guard in Shadowflame Hoyan. So it is on the easier side to farm. If you want to play some PvP and you expect to get nuked on a character, this could be clutch and a lifesaver. But guys, I think we'll wrap things up there. For additional tips on like when to shift, you can go ahead and reach out to me during the live streams, always helping people out. But in general, you start with Nico Nana, and you're going to stay there for a very long time because you get awesome shells like the Gigabyte, the Artisan, the White Fangs. Remember, this is not just for PvP, or sorry, damage units, but you can use this on your PvE opener, get some early swift raid for that plus 15% speed. And then I would say jump into something like Shadowflame Hoyan for your Revelations, your Jackal Guards, and then do a little Hell mode for something like a Codex of Magic, because you're going to want at least one, if not two, if not three. I've seen some people rock like 3+ of these. But after that, then you can start venturing into your, your Sharon shells, like these 3, for example, or you can start doing PvP for things like the Count, things like Lighthouse, all right? I don't want to overwhelm you all with info, but get to farming. Shells are one of the most important aspects of Etheria, and good luck rolling. Tell me if you get anything insane, those 333 perfect Inferno shells. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace out, everybody.